And congratulations, everyone. You made it through the week. Another week of amazing food safety, amazing food quality, all the wonderful food that we eat and enjoy every single day. And if it wasn't for you, we wouldn't have that on our tables. And a lot of times, what we do in food safety goes unrecognized. But Dr. D and I, we're here for you. And we say thank you. Thank you for all that you do to help keep us safe. If you're new, this is the Food Safety Chat Live. And every Friday, 8 a.m. Mountain Time, 10 a.m. Eastern, we live stream on LinkedIn and YouTube, and I get to bring you an amazing guest from the world of food safety. And if you're living under a rock, you may not know who this guy is, but everybody else knows Dr. Darin Detwiler. Fantastic. I love having him on the show. Darin, how you doing today, sir?
Great. Thank you for having me.
Oh, absolutely. And let's see. So people are filing in here. So Ahmed's here. Always good to see him. Thank God it's Friday. Nice. And I am in Loveland, Colorado, where we're having a beautiful fall. It's going to be almost 80 degrees today. And I would imagine it's pretty nice where you're at as well, Darin. Where are you today?
I am currently in Palm Springs, California.
Nice. And I was admiring your custom background here as we were preparing to go on the show. Very nice. Got the book up there. You have a picture of Riley. That is really cool. I like that.
Yeah, it's a virtual background. I'm currently in my in-laws' place, and you kind of take what you get in terms of locations.
And that's kind of the way it is. As long as doesn't end up being one of those viral videos. And this is where the virtual background comes in handy, right? Where somebody walks by in their underwear in the background. That's always hilarious.
Yep.
So people are filing in here. Let us know where you're at, and we'll give people a little bit of time here to get going. So with that, I put on for your introduction. Everybody's used to your academic background. So for your title here, you're one of your newer titles, right? Base Commander at the LA Pasadena U.S. Submarine Veterans Association, right?
Yes. So there are a number of bases across the country of submarine veterans, and we it's kind of like the VFW or the American Legion, but for submarine veterans. And we we support our history. And one of the coolest things is that one of my jobs is we are the caretakers of the U.S. World War II Submarine Memorial West. There's one on the East Coast, there's one on the West Coast. And this is a memorial to the 52 submarines that were lost in World War II, plus the 2 submarines that were lost during the Cold War. And it's a beautiful memorial that just makes sure that we have a place that recognizes the people who were lost in service of their country, but who were serving as submarines.
Nice. Well, I would imagine too, your chapter is probably a pretty big one too, right?
It is pretty big. We got over 100 members. We have some World War II submarine veterans. We got one guy. I met him. I spent some time with him earlier this year. The guy's 101 years old.
Wow.
And another one of our members was former President Jimmy Carter, who is a submarine veteran. A lot of people lost track of the fact that he was on a submarine before he was president. And just it's an incredible group of people. I mean, I'm actually one of the younger members. There's most of them are Korea, Vietnam, and then again some World War II veterans, but a good number of Cold War era veterans like myself.
Nice. Remember, we lived on the East Coast, and down in Baltimore, in the harbor down there in the touristy area, there's a submarine there. I forget what its name was, but yeah, we had a tour of that.
I think it's the Tusk or Tursk.
Tursk. That sounds right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing how many submarine museums I've been to. I actually put together a collection because, like for instance, in Cleveland at IFP this year, there was a submarine right by there. In Pittsburgh a couple years ago, there's a submarine there. There's a submarine in Philadelphia. There's submarines in so many places, and I always make an effort to go to them. It's kind of like my my non-food related activity kind of a thing. That's my thing. That's my jam.
Nice. Yeah, and that's a good thing, right? We all need to have other interests, right? Food safety, right? It can really pull you in and becomes your whole world if you're not careful. And it's good to have hobbies for sure. And that's a good one. Definitely serving the country and helping out these veterans and taking care of that's legacy and history, super important. That's nice. So people are filing in here. Brett, Lewis, Elizabeth, good to see everybody.
Hey, Lewis.
Nice. Yeah, Lewis. And so Elizabeth is going to be on her first time on the chat. She's going to be coming up here in Q4. Elizabeth and I just recently were introduced. Fantastic person. So thanks for coming, Elizabeth. So one of the things that we do on the show here, Elizabeth, is that we're getting started is we share a drink with everybody of your favorite beverage. So raise your glasses, please, and join Darin and I. Cheers. Oh, excellent. Hal's here as well, too. Yep, Hal's going to be on the show coming in Q4, too. Super excited about that. That'll be his first time, believe it or not, on the show. Hal has not been on the show yet.
Wow.
So this is good for Elizabeth and Hal in that they get to see how I torture my guests. So this is the torture part of the show. It's the dad joke. Are you ready for the dad joke?
I am.
Brace yourselves, everyone. Actually, so I did a little research on this, and we actually have a common background, Darin, that I didn't even really think about until now. But I used to work in a submarine shipyard building submarines in my past. But it was a great job. I really enjoyed it, but it didn't work out, and it didn't last that long. Unfortunately, they went under.
There you go.
That's one of those that you can just torture. You can just drag that one out as long as you want. I can see Norm Macdonald telling that one and just be like, yeah, and it's a sub, and I was down on the sub. Oh man. But moving on with God, we got a ton to cover here. And I wanted to point out here as well a couple of things before we get started, housekeeping items. Believe it or not, Darin, this October is the 5th year anniversary of the Food Safety Chat. Believe it or not, I've been doing this for 5 years now.
It's amazing when you really get into a rhythm with something you like. The time just kind of passes and you don't even realize it.
Yeah, exactly. I went back and looked, and maybe I'll repost some of these. So Jose Sabal was my guest on the first chat, and I go back and look at it now. It's embarrassing, right? So you don't really realize how much progress you make and how much better things are now, and the technology, just so much better now than it was then. Oh, Lewis had so he said, ask Darin about driving a NASCAR race in a simulator. That sounds like a good story.
Yes. There was a event, the BRCGS event in Charlotte, which was right by the NASCAR Hall of Fame.
Ooh.
And it was really cool. They had simulators, they had cars and so much interactive, not just displays. And I took some photos, and my youngest son, he's 29. It's kind of funny because he's like, why did you go to this thing? So I explained to him. All he cared about was that it was cool that the Hawaiian kings, like King Hawaiian, they do the King Hawaiian.
Oh, yeah, the rolls. Yeah.
He loves those, and they have a car. And so he was excited that there was a King's Hawaiian car.
Nice. When a company I was working in the past, we had a leadership outing, and the president of the company took us out to Pocono in New York, and you can go on the track, and these are real NASCAR race cars that have been retired that you get to drive, which was super cool. I think I got up to almost 175 miles an hour in the car I was in. Of course, there's no speedometer in there. You've just got your revs and these type of things. But scary. Oh man. But just to do it once was really cool.
Wow.
So part of that, and we'll dive into this now, is that you, my friend, have been super, super busy. And if you haven't seen his series on silent enemies about submarines and what he learned, and there's a 5-part series. 2 came out yesterday. I have the link. I'll put this in here toward the end of the chat for the first part 1 of the story in there. You got to read them. Fantastic. And I was complimenting you before we got in here too. You're a really good writer. I mean, it's really engaging. It's a very good storytelling piece.
Well, thank you very, very much. And a, you're talking about 5 years since you started the podcast here.
Mhm,
I went back and looked in my records, and my first published article
mhm.
was in 1984.
Wow.
I have been writing for a long time, and so what's crazy is I've been writing and having articles published since before I was in the Navy and serving on a submarine. But I served on a submarine. I was in the Navy from 1986 to 1992, and then the Naval Reserves, 1993 and 1994. And I went to school, the Navy, to become a nuclear engineer. And I have to admit, I wasn't even sure I was going to be able to pass the school, but I did.
Mhm,
And then I ultimately, so I went to schools in Florida and in Idaho in the middle of the desert,
mhm.
which of course screams Navy.
Yeah.
Um, but at the time, the world's largest collection of nuclear reactor facilities was in the desert in the middle of Idaho.
Mm,
And then I got to my submarine in San Diego, and I did two back-to-back tours on the same submarine. And I started in San Diego, but then we went up to the Seattle area for shipyards. And then after that, we were supposed to go back down to San Diego, but then they relocated us to Pearl Harbor. And so it's kind of like going to the same building all the time
mhm.
with everyone you go to work with, but your building is now picked up and moved from from one location to another location. And then all the families have to move as well. And but so I served during the Cold War, and all of my operations were in the Pacific Ocean, and that all came to a halt when the Jack and the Box E. coli outbreak
Mm,
took place, and I kind of packed it away. I just kind of moved on. Um, you know, kept the certificates and the uniform stuff, and kept some memories, but I really don't have a significant. I'm sure there's some psychologist or some uh, philosopher out there who will explain why it took me almost 3 decades to really kind of combine my experiences from the submarine into the food safety sector. Because once I started doing that, it was just uh, the connections. It's almost like there's foreshadowing, and there was uh,
mm.
moments that are like, "Wow, I did not even think about that. That is a direct parallel to this," or that was a big eye opener, and now I'm saying it in this context here. So it just be kind of it wasn't a story that's been sitting around for a long time. It's kind of the story that I'm writing is something that just came about within the last few months.
Hmm, interesting. Yeah, you just reminded me of my writing story when I was in high school. So I was in the 10th grade, and there was a contest, a writing contest, and it was like write an essay. It was the just the beginning of around mothers against drunk driving type things, and they had sponsored a statewide essay contest, and the prize was you got to go to a conference in Alabama and go visit the big conference, and it was all expense paid for the winner. And I actually won that contest, and so I got to go on that trip, and that's how I got kind of involved in that. So it's similar from that same standpoint from the food safety. So with drunk driving, you kind of protecting people from that standpoint too. And I didn't even think about that until now. Even during our prep for this chat. So it is kind of interesting how those things kind of develop out, isn't it?
Yeah, and you don't go like thinking about these things. You just kind of all of a sudden realize, oh, that came from somewhere. I wonder if that's tied to this. And then
Hmm.
uh, I started writing, and what I found crazy was that um, there were things that I was writing. There were connections I was making while I was writing. I guess it's kind of like when you're in the zone, you kind of go back
Mhm.
in time in your mind. All of a sudden,
Yes.
you're realizing that. And this story, it's 4 parts with a 5th part that's an epilogue. And it started off as one long story, and then it became a 2-part, and then I kept expanding it, and then it was like, okay, let's make this a 4-part story. And
it just I don't know. It was one of those things where it just kind of came so naturally. And one of the things I'm enjoying, I read a lot,
Mhm.
and most of it is very academic and very third person, but to kind of shift into the first person voice more and more. In my first book, Food Safety Past, Present, and Predictions, which is right here.
It's hard to do that, isn't it? To get your finger right. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. I had to convince the publisher to allow me to write some of the chapters in first person,
Uh-huh.
because it's like, okay, you can't write this in third person. This is, this is my lived experience. Let me write it in first person. So, starting in about 2018 was when I really gravitated towards writing more and more in first person.
Mhm. It's yeah, if you have a technical background, it's hard to write in first person. You automatically go to a passive third person type technical. And yeah, when I put my book together, same thing, right? My editor had a 'cause with mine, it was very much, yeah, I wanted it was my story. And so getting to that first person piece takes a lot of deliberate effort, definitely on that side. Um, so one of those linkages that I wanted to explore with you on this series with Silent Enemies was kind of this idea, and I don't want to give away too much of this story within. I want everybody to go out there and read it, but it's really is there's a saying that comes up for me relative to that, which is you always need to plan for the best, but you must prepare for the worst. You have to take those contingencies, and hopefully the worst doesn't happen. But if you don't follow that rule, if it does happen, you're in a world of hurt.
Yeah, I'm doing a lot of work now on like mock recalls and recall simulations, and there's a big difference.
Mm,
Um, when I was on the submarine, we would do these exercises where drills became theory to practice, and it wasn't like a fire drill where the alarm goes off and you just leave, like when you were in school or something like that.
yeah.
It was, okay, well, if these people are here and if this was to happen, then if this was the conditions, then these are the things that would take place and this was what would happen. Or, what if we, lost engine control this, if we had a reactor scram, what if we had a leak here, or what if we have a failure in this? And so we would do these things called theory to practice, where they would start off essentially like a mock recall followed
Mhm.
by a recall simulation. In that, the mock recall, which is kind of like a paperwork activity for the most part,
Yeah.
the mock recall would be a tabletop activity where we would have in the cruise mess, which is where all the tables are where people eat. We'd have papers all over the place, and we'd be like, okay, well, here's the conditions. We're at this speed, we're at this temperature, we're in these conditions, we're at this depth, and then this would happen. And then what would happen? Well, within this much time, this would take place, this would take place, we would see this change. So we start to make predictions. And then we even get out like, pen and paper and be doing like, okay, well, based on this, the equation would say that it would take this long for the temperature or the pressure to change. And so if we go back and have these conditions set, when we go back into the engine room, we should be able to see that within, I'm making some numbers up, within 15 minutes, we'll see an X percentage increase in the pressure, or, the temperature will go to this. So, um, then we would go back and run the actual drill.
Mhm.
And part of the drill was you made it as real as possible, and you would continue to do the drill until there was something wrong, until there was something, a failure, a misstep, a lesson learned, whatever it is. And then you would debrief it.
Yeah.
And after the drill, you would debrief it and you would make sure that everyone knows what was learned from this. And the biggest thing is that we did not run a drill that was convenient or that was comfortable. We would always be upping the game. I mean, we would, we're running a fire drill, for instance, and we're wearing portable oxygen masks, and they put hair nets on top of them to simulate the decreased
Smoke.
visibility. The other thing is that we would have to breathe in manifolds. So you'd have a mask and it's got a hose, and you'd have to know where all the places are to plug in. And of course, if there's no visibility, or if we lose power, you can't see these things. So you had to know where these things were from memory. And part of the qualification process literally was being blindfolded and putting on a mask from the very forward part of the submarine, and you would have to go all the way to the back part of the submarine, and you would have to know where all these manifolds are, because if you don't, you're gonna you can't breathe. You'd have to
Yeah.
rip off the mask. You'd have to start all over again. So there were ways in which, again, it was not convenient. It was as real as possible, because you don't want to find out that you can't handle the real situations when you're in the thick of a fire or a flooding, a casualty kind of situation. The same kind of thing plays out with food recalls. A recall simulation should be an opportunity for you to test your protocols, your procedures, your equipment, your people. You don't want to do it when it's the most convenient. You don't want to do it the middle of a Wednesday. You want to do it when it's Friday at 6 p.m. When so and so is out of state for a conference, or when you're in the middle of a shift transition, or things like that.
Yeah.
Um,
No,
and
and
for me, using the submarine analogy makes sense. I mean, for another
Mhm.
person, you have the locker room. The locker room training before you go out to do drills on the field, and then you have the game. And after the game, you'll have a debrief of some sorts. But these should not be these different evolutions should not be foreign within the food industry. That idea of understanding the difference and the value between a mock recall or a recall simulation.
no, good point. Yeah, and there was a really cool graphic you sent over to me on this too. I'll bring up here for everybody. So, th- so everybody, I think, would agree that if for the football analogy here on the top row is practicing on the field is very different from going to the Super Bowl. Right? The pressure, the crowd, you can't. The whole point of doing the preparation is to get as close to your point, Darin, to get as close to the real thing as you can. And a lot of food companies just don't understand this. It's like, oh, okay, well, no, we did a traceability exercise, one forward and one back. That's all that the standard requires. Oh boy, that you're not getting much past the locker room phase if you do that. You don't understand what's going on. And the big piece of that with that practice is you need to learn how to operate under pressure. I think that's the key message there for that. And you don't know how you're going to react until it actually happens. So you have to get as close to that as possible. And your submarine analogy, I love that. So that middle picture down there, the all hands drill. Now all of a sudden you got this big mask on and you're breathing into it through that little things that you don't even think about.
Oh
So
yeah, and the limited visibility, and I mean, this thing is on your face. This thing is
yeah.
pressure on your face, and how do you put it on quickly and effectively, and how do you continue to do your job with this mask on? And this was, I mean, we would wear these. I'm not kidding, nearly weekly in
Mhm.
training, because this was a reality of what we would be doing. Now these guys are sitting in these are the guys who are actually driving the submarine in the
Yep.
control room, and but I would be back in the engine room, and I would have to literally travel half the submarine for what I was doing
Mhm.
in the engine room. And you can see those hoses going up. They're plugged into manifolds. You've got to
Yeah.
unplug those and plug those into wherever you got to go. You have to know, I mean, even knowing where this equipment is. And there's so many different things to do. But again, the real thing, people watch the football game on television, or in person if they go to the arena or the stadium or whatever. But most people don't really pay attention to, or even have much of awareness of, what goes on prior to the game. And when well, obviously people don't watch submarine critical incidents like real fires, but we don't want to ignore the idea of all the work that goes into the tabletop exercises, the training, the certification, and to do that. Again, submarine analogy, but this is what I did for a long time.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's other people. Elizabeth, I believe, said that she was in the Army. I would imagine that she would be like, oh, in my world, the context would be this, this, and this.
Mhm.
And correct me if I'm wrong. Anyone else? Even the NASCAR, right? The NASCAR museum was brought up. You've got something similar to the football analogy there that would play out for a NASCAR race.
Yeah.
Duncan talking about sparring in the dojo is worlds apart from sparring on the street. Yes, but one is part of the training or part of the evolution that gets one to be able to fight on the street, if you will.
Hmm. Yeah, exactly. And part of this is, and we'll get more into this as well, relative to the recall piece of it. And this is something I've talked about on the chat before as well, Darin, is unless you've been through a full-blown class 1 recall as the recall coordinator, you don't know what it's like. I've had to manage too. And I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy, but having been through the experience, you understand that, just like being in the Super Bowl, you're on the spot and you have to know what to do. And the time to figure out what to do is not walking onto the field and saying, "Oh, hey guys, I'm here. Let's play." No, right? You have to practice and practice and practice. And the scenario, and I'm sure you saw this in your scenarios too. They would throw in monkey wrenches, right? It's like, okay, well, there's low air pressure in the manifold, so what are you going to do, right? So then they would throw these different wrenches into that scenario. We often see on military shows too, where soldiers are, they'll blindfold them and they have to take their rifle apart and put it back together blindfolded. What, is that just for fun? No. They have to know how to do that in the dark. They have to be sitting somewhere in the dark and be able to do that secondhand. And that has to be done through practice.
Well, it's funny you say throwing monkey wrenches. There were times in drills where, you'd be standing there. This is weird, but there were these workbenches and work counters between the two main engines. And I remember this one drill where at this point, because of flooding, we should have been, going to the surface. And I don't remember what the situation was exactly, but what I will never forget was that we had stuff on the counter, basically, and the drill master, as we called them, would be like, walk over and would, swipe everything off the table, and literally wrenches would go flying. And the drill master would be like, "You think this stuff would just be sitting around, and you don't think it would be flying if this was the real thing, kind of a deal." And you're like, "Oh, all my stuff is now all over here," and it's kind of crazy. It is that kind of not understanding what goes into things. I'm drawn to a movie, and I know that you know this movie. A movie where the ultimate climax is this championship competition and the underdog wins. We love the underdog story, but I think that Karate Kid did a major injustice to things. He literally skipped most of the steps that we would put in to be able to be at that level of competition. This kind of wax on, wax off, and he really didn't know what he was doing. He had so little training and preparation, and then he goes to the competition and ends up winning it with the bird kick thing or whatever.
Oh, that's right.
It kind of tells us that, if we have the right coach, you don't have to go through the kind of like the Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hours kind of kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And it just was a complete opposite to my experience in terms of you drill over and over and over and over again. Um, and you'll never get it right. You just want to be as prepared as you can be for the real thing. And we
Right.
did have real things, and I talk
Oh,
about
yeah.
that in my story. Is
Yes.
there were real things were happening to us.
And the whole point of those things is, and so with this, and I think food companies, and I've done this with food companies, and Rebecca talks about a good one here, cyber attacks. I was working at a company where we had a ransomware issue, and yeah, all of the computers in the entire companies worldwide were shut down. What do you do? Right? Nobody practices for that, but you need to. And so one of my recall scenarios, to your point, Darin, I was notified by the state regulatory agency that they had a hit on one of my products on a Friday. This Friday was December 23rd. I found out at 4 p.m. The entire office empty. Everybody gone home for the holiday. I was on a plane to California Christmas Eve to go out and work with FDA in the plant. Um, that's not the same as doing a mock recall.
Yeah.
Now you're under this pressure. And one of the most important things, and one of the underlying things with this is, and I want to reemphasize this as we're going through this, is it's the people side of things. Is in your scenarios and in recall scenarios, if the person who has responsibilities panics, you're done, right? And you had a really good saying when we were preparing for this chat on Monday, which I'm stealing, I'm going to use forever now, is Admiral Rickover said, responsibility cannot be delegated. You can share it, but you cannot delegate that responsibility. And I was like,
Yeah.
that's brilliant. I love that.
You can't be like, oh, that's not my job.
Yeah.
There was no ability to say that on a submarine. And a lot of people, don't realize too that, so we would go out to sea, and usually the typical format was, we would be on watch for 6 hours. We would be 6 hours off watch, and then we would be 6 hours on coming. It was an
Mhm.
18-hour day, essentially. And so if you had watch from midnight to 6 a.m., then you'd be off watch from 6 a.m. to noon. Then you'd be oncoming from noon to 6 p.m. and be on watch from 6 p.m. to midnight.
Mhm.
And in theory, you'd be able to get some sleep in there. But the reality is that if there were drills, if there were training, if there was maintenance that had to be done, um, certain evolutions taking place, if those took place when you were supposed to be sleeping, you weren't sleeping. And if there was a issue that took place, you can't call in backup. You don't call in the off crew team or call in another submarine. You were always responsible. And even when we were at port, tied up to the pier, there were so many times where I went home because I've got the day off on a Saturday because I stood watch all day on Friday or something like that. And I'd still have to come back in sometimes because I was in charge of something and something happened and it was my
Mhm.
job to come in. But the biggest thing was that you cannot outsource responsibility. Once you have it, it is yours. That never goes away from you. And that was a big thing with Rickover, understanding the idea of responsibility. So we were a crew, we had about 150 people on a submarine, and we all had these main functions and main duties, main jobs, but we had other jobs as well. And part of our job also was to get trained and be proficient and to train others and to help them be proficient, and to work together to the point where even, you know, I don't want to be in an engine room by myself. There's part of an engine room you'd be in for 6 hours, and it's kind of boring, when you're all by yourself. And, for someone to come back and even for 20 minutes hang out, and we would talk about stupid things. It was the 80s. And, we would talk about, whatever television shows when we were a kid or whatever pop culture at the time, whatever. We didn't have social media at the time, so usually it was about music or television or movies or whatever, or sports. But if I want that to happen for me when I'm standing watch, then I'm going to go back and hang out for a little bit, give a break in the middle of a 6-hour period for another watchstander. So,
Yeah.
all in all, within reality, we would get very little sleep. You probably get 4 hours every 36 hours of sleep.
Wow.
Um, very little sleep. It was a very intense work environment. And, we did have things in this story. I talk about flooding. We had fires. We had reactor emergencies. We had people getting seriously hurt. We had critical incidents. These things happen. I'm just, I'm really glad that I was not seriously hurt. I've got some burns uh, and some cuts. That was about it. But the other guys, broken bones. Um, we had a guy who had a heart attack um, when we were in the shipyards, and he passed away.
Oh,
We had people that had to be, you know, taken to the hospital and surgeries, things. I spent enough time on that submarine. You saw people get seriously hurt from time to time, and we didn't have like a major crash or, any kind of seriously major catastrophic event go on. Very fortunate when I was on my submarine.
but yeah, you're in a constant state of vigilance. And like you were talking about in the engine room, right? As a nuclear technician, you had early warning systems, even for radiation, and, constantly monitoring those and making sure that things were going correctly, and being able, just at the drop of a hat, say, okay, here's what we need to do, and then do it with that training, right?
Yeah, that idea of these, and this is what the whole inspiration for the story was, is that there are these invisible threats, these silent enemies that we dealt with. It wasn't just the pressure of the water at all times when we were submerged that you start to not think about. You start to
Mhm.
become comfortable with. You start to kind of, not notice certain things, right? So you always had to be aware of the pressure, especially in the engine room, because we had so much seawater coming in and out of the submarine. But there's also with the reactor compartment, we had radiation, again, invisible, kind of a silent threat. We had, I mean, everything from gases, um, um, our refrigeration and air conditioning units,
Mhm.
always being looking for like phosgene and other gases that are colorless, odorless, tasteless, but they can displace oxygen. Um, so but the radiation one is the one that you become most vigilant about, uh, and that's what I wrote about in part one after the flooding incident, where I'm constantly going into the reactor compartment and except for the fact that it smells dusty and it's kind of dark in certain areas and it's usually hot even after it's been shut down for a while. You don't really have any sense of the radiation that's there unless you're paying attention to your dosimetry. And I talk about how some things you can read in real time, other things it would be delayed but highly accurate. And then there
Mhm.
was the third level of catastrophic level radiation exposure. And the reality is that if that had to be read, it was already too late for me. Um,
Yeah.
there was no recovery from that. Someone was going to be harmed if that had to be read. And that was what stuck out to me in terms of too many times you hear about a major outbreak and that a company is not doing anything until they get enough indication after someone's already been harmed. And we
Yeah.
see this with recalls as well. And yet, when you really dig into it, there were red flags, there were signs that no one was paying attention to. So that's the analogy I was making with the radiation, those invisible threats with radiation, and the three different types of monitoring. And we need all three of them. But if we
Yeah.
rely on the delayed catastrophic input for us to be able to justify taking action, that usually means that someone's already been harmed.
Yeah. And I think the perfect analogy between those two is your environmental monitoring program. If you're finding hits in your plant and you're seeing listeria in that back warehouse, guess what? That's your early warning. that meter is starting to go up on that radiation badge. You need to take action now to keep it from going to that catastrophic level. And managing, right? We all want to be in that position where the best, the best recall is the one that never happens, and that's part of our job. And it's the same thing on the sub. We practice and we train so that we don't have the issue, but if it does, we need to know how to react properly. And in both scenarios, we'll reemphasize this again, is calm. And as the recall coordinator in those past recalls, all eyes turned to me, right? So, I let everybody know. Some people weren't available, but we had practiced enough and we knew what to do. And I knew my role in that scenario. I didn't have all the answers. And that's part of the thing too. And I think this is a good parallel between the two as well. Is at any given point in time during a crisis situation, Darin, you don't have all the information. So when that crisis first starts, it's like, okay, Mr. Armentrout, this is Florida Department of Public Health. We found this, we found that, we need to do, et cetera. And that's all you know. And you're like, okay, you have to act on what you know. Now, when you look on it in the past and you look back and say, okay, well, now I'm going to deconstruct the crisis and see, to your point, that's one of the important things with going through these training scenarios is when you're done, you go back and look at it, and your instructors would say, okay, here's what everybody did well. Here's where you didn't do well. Let's do it again. And you work on these processes. A lot of companies will skip that too. But in this scenario, the important thing was the calmness, because people looked to me as the leader in that situation, say, okay, Bryan, what do we need to do? Yeah, here's where we need to start. Here's the next steps. And the important thing in this, and this is what I was always emphasized with the leadership in the companies, and I still do now, is nothing else matters. Companies want to act like, oh, we got this recall thing going on. We'll kind of deal with this over here on the side, but we've got the big showing at the fancy food show and the product thing with Target tomorrow. And no, nothing else matters. The only thing that matters is mitigating the crisis, getting to the resolution, and then moving forward and keeping the damage as low as you can. Same thing in the submarine, right?
Yeah, and there's something to be said about. I really appreciate what you said in terms of the leader doesn't necessarily know all the answers, but it knows their people, knows
Mhm.
where to get the answers, and knows what to do when they get those answers. How to process it, how to move forward, how to
Yeah.
get themselves out of the situation. Because you're not just dealing with, the immediacy of the incident there. You're dealing with the fact that you've got in a submarine, you've got a crew. You want to look out for them. You want to have the same number of crew return to port that left port, but you're also there for a mission. You're there to serve a mission to protect the nation and to obviously there's other missions that we would go on, kind of a thing. So putting that all into context and realizing, okay, here's what we can do now. It's never about knowing all of the information. I got to tell you, there's plenty of people that look at their job. I mean, I remember being afraid when I was getting I remember thinking that I was worrying about how am I going to remember everything.
Mhm.
And you can't remember everything, but you have to know enough to know, okay, this is an operational level of knowledge. Here's where the people that know more than I know are. Uh, Here's who I go to. Here is where I can find the protocols and the procedures that are written down. Here's where I go to for this. It is about knowing the larger like the total environment, understanding that you're all there to put the pieces of the puzzle together as a leader and staying calm in that time. Um, this is why we go through so much training and drills and certification process, and it's tough. I mean, there was, you always retrain and recertify, and you go through oral boards and you demonstrate your ability to know this stuff, and you're constantly training. We joked about it, like we spend more time training than we do spend time doing the things we had to do. But
Yeah.
man, when we were doing the things we had to do, we were confident that we were surrounded by people who could really do the job and support us and what we had to do as well.
That's a good point. Yeah, having trust in your teammates that they know what they're supposed to do as well. So I was thinking another parallel too. Is we all fly on airplanes, and you get the opening spiel with the flight attendants, and one of the things that they always say is, if an oxygen mask drops, here's how you put on your mask. Put your mask on first, and then help others. So if you're on that sub and your response is to start running around and not have your mask on, but you've been trained that no, first thing I gotta do is put on this mask so that I've got a good source of air and I'm protected so that I can act appropriately. Nothing else matters. It has to be like, oh, yep, do that, right? Um, it's like on the airplane, the flight attendants don't go through all of the scenarios that they've been trained in. All they say is, "We're here for your safety," and but behind the scenes, they've been trained in different scenarios and what they need to do in those scenarios. It's that training piece never goes away.
Well, I mentioned the Karate Kid in terms of
Yeah.
where I think Hollywood might be sending a wrong message or whatever. But with submarine movies, one of the constant things you see on any kind of a submarine movie is during like fire, flooding, things of those natures. One of the first things you do is to shut the hatch that separates your compartment from the next.
Yeah.
Uh, and even though that has historically had the potential of someone on one side of that hatch may die in a flooded compartment, or may
Yeah.
have, during a fire, may die. But if you don't shut that hatch, the entire submarine may not be able to get to the surface, or the entire area the entire submarine may be compromised. And I very much remember, oh, it's so easy during a drill to just go there and shut that hatch, between like engine room forward and engine room aft kind of a thing. Uh, but you do that in reality, and it's like, okay, but now my crewmate, my friend, is on the other side,
Yeah.
or I'm stuck on this side, and we only have the resources we have, and the people we have, and the knowledge that we have, and the time we have. There are very specific scenarios where you have to be comfortable with doing the right thing instantly, and even though that may put someone in more jeopardy, but ultimately support the entire ship.
There's no time to second guess. And the analogy with that for the food would be, how are you segregating your food? So a lot of times we'll see recalls where you'll see the announcement from FDA, so and so company recalled this lot code for this product at this plant, and then a couple of weeks later you'll see FDA has expanded this recall to all products made in this plant. Why does that happen? It happens because that plant has woefully inadequate systems and they don't do a good job of segregation. They have rework that's jumping over from production to production. There's no hatches between those to separate them, to make sure that if there is an issue, that you're keeping it localized and minimizing that to protect public health and isolating that product.
Well, or the scenario where the plant manager thinks that it's better to ignore the potential physical contaminant issue, because what's the worst that can happen? I don't want to cost the company some money in terms of getting rid of some product. But then if you have a recall, which there's a case I work with where they ultimately did do a recall, and if I remember right, getting rid of the product would have cost about $90,000. So that was not done because the plant manager wanted to save the company money. But they ultimately had to do a recall, call a recall, and execute that. By the time everything was said and done, it cost $12 million. The CEO of the company reported. So understanding the proactive versus reactive, or the bigger picture, this may be a smart decision in your mind to justify because of something financially, but the long term, or the reactive, or the the reality in terms of consequences of that may have more, may cause more damage, whether it's economically or public health, right? Or even reputation. We're seeing some companies lately with the end of last year that we typically never saw in the news about food safety issues, and now their reputation's taking a hit because of just some decisions that were made. And you brought up the idea of expansion and recalls. We've seen that lately, not only with the radioactive shrimp, but
Yeah.
also with the hot dogs with the wood, the wood physical contaminants in the corn dogs.
Yeah.
And again, we keep seeing these expanding recalls.
Yeah, it's bad systems. And part of this as well is, to your point with the submarine, is when there's drills taking place on the sub, it's everybody who's involved with the drills. And a lot of times we miss this in food companies, Darin, because I say, oh, okay, well, we'll do this recall practice at the plant, and we'll have the plant manager and the maintenance manager and the quality manager. And no, you need to involve the company. The company needs to be involved in these scenarios. You learn a lot when you do that, because if you have a full-blown crisis management training scenario, which you should, you're involving the SLT, R&D, operations, legal, QA. Everyone needs to be involved, including sales and marketing. And why would you want to involve sales? Like, they have nothing to do with the recall. Oh yeah, they do. Because what happens is, during a recall situation, the salesperson is the retailer's line of communication back to your company. They don't as the recall, they don't know who I am as the quality guy. I don't talk to them normally. So they're going to reach out to that salesperson and say, hey, we're seeing this recall out there and bringing product off the shelves. What's going on? What's going on with these corn dogs with the wood? I need to know what's going on. And you have other products at risk. If you don't inform the salesperson and keep them in the loop, they're going to extrapolate and come up with their own story. And that's a big weakness within systems that I see.
Well, also realize that the whole adage about who's making the decision about removing a product from the shelf. Well, that's someone over here, right? Who's actually removing it from the shelf?
Right.
The new guy you just hired last Tuesday.
Yeah.
If that guy who just hired last Tuesday has no idea that, what a lot code or what the QR code or whatever information is being used, or why, you have some decisions that are being made and executed by the least trained and experienced person in some cases, and yet someone over in the corporate headquarters is looking for answers. That's absolutely crazy. I just was talking with someone earlier this week that was saying how he was called in to help a company with the food safety plan, and he asked about who wrote their last HACCP plan for them, and this company, this person did it or whatever, and come to find out that the person who wrote their HACCP plan never physically visited their facility.
Wow.
It's like, how?
No.
How?
Crazy. And this all gets back to this concept, Darin, that I've been talking about a lot recently, is risk evaluation and figuring out in your company. I think, in a submarine, it's omnipresent, as you've been talking about in your series. It's always there. The pressure, the danger, the risk, you can feel it. And the worst danger is getting too comfortable with that environment. And food companies, I think, get that way too. It's like, we've always done it this way before. That tells me that they don't understand the risk profile of what they're doing. Are you selling product to children? Are you selling products with allergen cross-contamination? Is your sales team going out looking for new business and talking to elementary schools or nursing homes? Your risk profile has just changed. Does your CEO of your company, who's really good at running the company, do they understand food safety risk? That'd be like having the captain on the submarine not understanding the importance of running your drills.
Yeah, it's also like the idea of, oh, well, we're only going to train these people to, uh, you know, put out a fire.
Mhm.
Well, if a fire happens and one of the first things you do is shut the hatches between engineering space, between the different spaces in the submarine, what if the people who you train to put out the fire are on the other side? They're not in the compartment.
Yeah.
So we would train everyone. I mean, even the navigation team, the people who cooked food, the supply people, everyone would be trained enough on every compartment in order to earn your submarine, like a pilot's wings, your submarine warfare insignia.
Yeah.
Everyone had to have enough minimal training to be able to, if you happen to be in that compartment, you're able to help, be involved in whatever scenario.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's certain limits, but basic firefighting and damage control was, 100% training for every single person on that submarine.
Yeah.
So the same thing with a recall or with the HACCP plan or any kind of training. I was working with a company that they were doing an employee-led food safety committee, and what I thought was the greatest thing was that they literally had people from every different department, even security,
Good.
like a security gate, the warehouse, engineering, um, enterprise folks that did their networking and their sourcing of their spices and things like that. They wanted everyone involved, and to see this pay off. One of the stories that I often tell is when someone from engineering made the decision to not buy the best selling or highest rated anti-slip wheels for their forklifts
Yeah.
because those wheels were made out of wa- uh, like
Walnut.
rubber that was infused with walnut shells, and it
Yeah.
would have invalidated technically it would have invalidated their nut allergen free certification for that workspace. And imagine not having someone from engineering in on the conversations around food safety and allergen control.
Yeah. We're running short on time here, but there's something, Darren, that I wanted to make sure that everybody catches in this as part of this conversation is after you run the scenarios, the debrief is really the important part, right? Of okay, here's what worked, here's what didn't work. Let's make sure and run it again. And we're going to focus to make sure everybody knows your role relative to this. How did that fit in with what you were doing there?
Oh, I mean, to have those debriefs again, they would kind of start off as a tabletop kind of a scenario and having people reflect and chime in. But I remember many times we would go back to the engineering space to check out something that someone had not caught before. There were times where it resulted in recommendations and plans being drawn up to, relocate or to fix something or to change something because it didn't make sense.
Hmm.
One time it was as simple as, yeah, but when we take these hoses through this area, if there's a fire, they get caught up on this. There's no reason for this to be here. We can relocate this around the corner and then we don't get stuck on this. You don't know
Nice.
that unless you're trying to run fire hoses through a compartment that's got, tight clearances and all these different scenarios. It's funny how we would go back to tabletop and then go back into the actual uh, uh, location to walk it through and to see how this played out. But of
Yeah.
course, here's the thing: these are all only good for the people that are there. You've got turnover. We would have new people, people
Oh,
that would retire or transfer to another submarine, or people that would come in and they're either new or they're transferring from another submarine. And so, just like in a food facility, all this is only as good as the people who are right then, right there and then. You need to document this, and you need to make sure that critical learnings make their way into the next time you do it. And this is why you do it over and over again, is because you don't have necessarily the same people that are going to be there the entire time. You have to make sure that it becomes a continuous improvement, like almost like a living document,
that's a good
a
point.
living evolution.
Yeah. And yeah, so the chances of success and your risk profile has changed because the personnel changed. Let me put here
Yeah.
in the comments. is the link in New Food Magazine to part 1 of the Silent Enemies storyline. So 1 and 2 are out, 3, 4, and 5 are coming. Looking forward to those. And with that as well, guys, so with the risk assessment piece of this that we've been talking about as well with the conversation, is I also wanted to have a shout out here as well too to the group I'm working with on this, and we're just doing some really cool stuff on this, is Culture Advisory Group, Paul Valder and his team up in Toronto. And we're really getting into this piece of it now on the risk assessment side. And we're meeting with a lot of companies and getting a lot of positive feedback on this, which was amazing. So as always, we're out of time. Shoot. As always, Darin, a fascinating conversation. And thank you, everybody else. Amazing comments here. Ahmed, thank you very much. Read through all these comments here as well. Any quick closing comments, Darin, you have for anyone? Or
I easily could have written about other things. My goal was not to confuse people with like, you got to know about submarines to know about this. To me, I wanted to spark the idea that so much of what we learn and do and we hold as core principles, they're not unique to food safety leadership. They are observances and experiences that shape us as leaders, and they come from many different parts of our lives. And so many people, I've always been amazed how many people have military background and work in food safety. And I believe that there's a lot of great stories and examples and experiences that could be used. And in that kind of first person voice, own it. That was your experience. That can be used to help, really paint a picture of why we do what we do within the food industry. It's nothing new, but it's always of the utmost importance when it comes to trust and protecting the very people that we're supposed to be protecting.
Absolutely. And so with that, another fantastic food safety chat. Thank you, Dr. Detwiler, for being with us. And thank you, everyone, for joining us as well. And of course, we will be back here next Friday at the same time, 8 a.m. Mountain Time, 10 a.m. Eastern, where I'll bring another amazing guest on the show to talk with you. And of course, this is for you. And I appreciate all the comments and the investment of time and training that you need to be able to be successful in what you do. So in the meantime, have a great weekend, everybody. And we'll see you back here next week. Have a good one.